Welcome to episode 43 of the Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. And I'm back this week with a duo of 2D retro-inspired action RPGs. Incidentally, both coming from the same boutique site known as redartgames.com. So we've got a couple of really cool games in that vein. The first one is going to be known as Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, which was released originally on May 10th, 2022 for the PS4, Switch, PS5, Xbox One and Series X and S, and Windows digitally, but is now getting a physical release via Red Art as of last Friday, March the 10th for the PS4, PS5, and Switch only. I'll be getting into those details shortly, but just to set this up, Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is actually a companion / prequel game to a much larger effort known as Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes, which was the third highest grossing Kickstarter video game project of all time, behind Shenmue 3 and Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. If you haven't heard of this already, Eiyuden Chronicle 100 Heroes is actually a spiritual successor to Konami's cult classic Suikoden series, and the main series creator, known as Yoshitaka Murayama, in conjunction with the art designer on Suikoden 1 and 4, known as Junko Kawano, are working together for the first time in 25 years to bring this spiritual successor to life. Because, of course, Murayama, who is the creator of Suikoden, famously left Konami back in 2002 prior to the completion of Suikoden 3. There were a couple more sequels done after that, but essentially, the series has laid dormant since the mid-aughts. So for any fans of Suikoden looking to scratch that itch, this is an exciting time to get like a full-on size spiritual successor, but the game isn't finished yet. Currently in development, is scheduled for release later this year. So due to the game's delay, because it was supposed to come out last year, the main developer, Rabbit and Bear Studios, decided to put out a companion game because, let's face it, their Kickstarter was so successful. They were only asking for $500,000, and they ended up climbing all the way up to $4.5 million on their successful campaign, allowing them to add so many different perks like DLC, additions to the game, and including a companion game known as Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, which we're going to be talking about today. Now, before you decide to plop your money down on this, you have to understand firstly that Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is not a turn-based RPG like Suikoden or 100 Heroes. This is something entirely different. It's a 2D action RPG, side-scrolling with some Metroidvania elements. And I would say your enjoyment of Eiyuden Chronicle Rising is going to hinge almost entirely on whether you plan on playing 100 Heroes when it comes out, because alone as it stands, it is definitely a competent action RPG with some great graphics, a really enjoyable soundtrack, and overall really cool and addictive gameplay loop. But the actual questing and the overall gameplay structure is subordinate to the world building and lore building. That is the main draw of this game. It is a prequel to 100 Heroes. It is setting up the main events that are to come, and overall the satisfaction is going to come out of you meeting a lot of the characters that you're going to end up recruiting into your 100+ character army. Because as you may be familiar with, if you've played Suikoden back in the past, it was a turn-based RPG where you could recruit over 100 characters, have parties up to 6 players, you could have duels, military strategic battles. There was all these cool features you're going to see in 100 Heroes. But to get to that point, we are seeing how the world is being built in Rising and all of the characters that are going to take precedence in that bigger story. So if you are into the main game, this is going to serve you very well. So let's get into Eiyuden Chronicle Rising's gameplay and exploration, some of the pros and cons to see if this is a game for you, and if it's something that will feed into a curiosity for the larger game that's in the works. Very simply, in Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, you play as CJ, a young teenage scavenger who is a descendant of a long line of scavengers who ends up in this town called New Nevea, searching for treasure and adventure. Very simple premise, and along the way, she partners up with Guru, a half kangaroo, half man beast, fellow adventurer, as well as Isha, a fellow teenager who is the acting mayor of New Nevea in her father's absence. You're going to team up with these two characters, going on all these different quests, mostly fetch quests, to help the residents of this struggling village rebuild their city into a thriving metropolis, and along the way, uncover a very dark conspiracy underlying the town. So a lot of intrigue there. The game overall, since its release last May of 2022, has been criticized for being a little repetitive and a little over-reliant on fetch quests. I would counter, since the main crux of this game is building the city of New Nevea, that fetch quests seem appropriate in this regard, because on the whole, most missions, you're going to be going to different dungeons and biomes, defeating monsters, exploring, and gathering resources, because there's a lot of loot in this game. There's a lot of things to destroy, a lot of satisfying combat, but overall, you're going to be gathering natural resources, food ingredients, and bring these back to the town to help all the various shopkeepers, service providers build their shops, expand their inventory, and give you goodwill as the new resident among this town, and increase your reputation as the go-to person to get things done. So you are establishing yourself within the lore of this town, but also helping the town establish itself on a massive scale to bring in new residents. That's the whole point. And yes, I will admit that the quests can be a bit repetitive, sure, but the pace of the game, in conjunction with the excellent fast travel system, makes doing questing a breeze, if not enjoyable and addictive, because it has a really great loop. The game takes full advantage of the new hardware, such as the PS5, the Xbox Series, or modern PCs, to make the game quick. There's barely any loading time, and some quests can literally be completed in under a minute. You can go to the town, grab the quest, fast travel over to your next dungeon, or you can also choose to walk there too, depending on how slow or fast you want your gameplay experience to be. You can go to your quest, find it highlighted on your map as long as you have the appropriate quest highlighted, complete it, fast travel back to the town and collect your reward. And on top of that, you can also stack quests by talking to multiple residents at once, getting your log filled, going to the appropriate dungeon. It just feels like you're constantly in motion and completing activities, so much so that even if you're on a time constraint, say maybe you only have a half an hour in your day to get something accomplished in this day, you can feel like you've accomplished quite a bit even in a small period of time. And what's also nice about the gameplay loop is that when you complete a quest and go back to the resident to collect your reward, you'll get a stamp on a card. And then as you complete that card, you'll get a higher level card with even more stamps and more quests to accomplish. So it keeps you coming back for more. And I will say though that if you are like me, where you like to do all the side quests first before completing the next main quest, you will end up getting fairly overpowered. And this would be maybe another minor critique of the game, that it can get very easy if you decide not to mainline it and go do all the side quests. You can level up very quickly. I would say the game doesn't scale very well to you leveling up, so I found that I was basically steamrolling over the bosses, and I will admit I didn't even lose a life until I met the final boss. I only lost one life during the whole campaign, and once I learned the final boss's patterns, I steamrolled over them as well. Thankfully, when you do beat the game, there is a hard mode you can unlock. I do want to talk very quickly about combat, so I can compare it to other side-scrolling 2D action RPGs, especially the second game we're going to get into as well. The way combat is done definitely puts it in line with the Suikoden universe. I'll explain. So when you're out exploring or doing combat, each of the three characters you can control are assigned to a different face button on your control. So CJ has one button, Guru has another button, and Isha has another one. So when you press their corresponding button, the character will appear on screen, and you use that as their primary attack button. And any specific attack combos for that character are done by just jamming that one button. Plus, on top of that, you'll have a defensive maneuver button as well, where CJ can either dash through attacks, or Guru can do a block, Isha can do a disappearing motion. That's essentially how you do it. So it's very simplified, but the combat does feel very satisfying. The impact is huge. There's lots of loot to get. And the way it ties into Suikoden's battle system is in the sense that it does have an homage to Suikoden's Unity system, in the sense that the characters can combine to do combo attacks, which are known as link attacks. So I'll explain. What will happen is, let's say you're playing a CJ and you hit the attack button, but then after you do your attack with CJ, then you'll hit the attack button for Guru. He'll jump in, do his attack, then you can hit the button for Isha, she'll jump in, do her attack, and then you can keep doing sequential button presses to cycle through the characters and do up to 5 different hits. This never gets old, feels incredibly satisfying, and makes you really feel like you're just laying some punishment down the enemy. So the action always feels very fast and frenetic, even though it has a very simplified control structure, and there is a lot of customization you can do. You can always go back to the towns, you can upgrade your armor, unlock additional skills, more buffs for your weapons, and even eventually you'll be able to equip what's known as rune lenses. This is a major factor in the story. Rune lenses are what allow you to add magic to your attacks, so you'll be having all these different elements like fire, ice, earth, and lightning to really just add some extra depth to the gameplay. Overall, combat and exploration feel very satisfying, even though it's very simplified. And yes, the quest structure does take a backseat to the action, because overall it is about building a world, about learning about these characters, about their different relationships, how all the residents tie to one another, who likes who doesn't like who's a gossiper, who is creating intrigue. That overall is the whole point of this game, to set the stage for a much larger experience, to see how New Nevea came about, how it built up, who the residents are, who the main stars are, who's the threat, and what's the underlying conspiracy that's fueling this entire narrative. On that grounds, I can recommend it. But as I said before, if you're not planning on playing the full game of 100 Heroes, this is going to be kind of hit or miss for you. Regardless, if this is striking your fancy and you do enjoy the experience and want it physically on your library, you can now buy this as of last Friday, March the 10th, 2023 via redartgames.com physically for the PS4, PS5, and Switch in a standard edition. These will all be available for the same price of 35 euros or approximately $35 USD. So you can get those now from redartgames.com for the platform of your choice. Stick around. We're coming back after the break with yet another retro-inspired 2D action RPG with a heavy influence from a classic Japanese game designer. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this. We'll be right back. And we're back on episode 43 of The Collecting Confidant with your host, GunstarHero. The theme of this week's episode is retro-inspired 2D action RPGs, with both titles being published by redartgames.com. The second title on the docket today is one for fans of classic Vanillaware titles because it wears its inspiration on its sleeves. This title is Sword of the Vagrant, which is now available for PS4, Switch, Xbox, and Windows. There's going to be a PS5 version coming out later this year, but physically, it is now open for pre-order for the PS4 and Switch only via redartgames.com. We'll get more into those buying options soon, but first, let's talk about the game and see if this is for you, because if you are a fan of the old Vanillaware titles, and specifically, I'm talking about Muramasa the Demon Blade for the Nintendo Wii out of 2009, and its remaster for the PlayStation Vita, known as Muramasa Rebirth. These were classic, side-scrolling, hand-painted, hack-and-slash action RPGs that have a cult following, but are unfortunately stranded on their respective platforms, because as of date, Muramasa has not been remastered for the PC, for modern consoles. So if you do want to play those old classic titles, you have to go get a Nintendo Wii or Wii U or a PS Vita respectively. Otherwise, those games are kind of lost to time. So if you're looking to scratch that itch, feeling a bit nostalgic about old vanillaware hack and slash titles, sort of the Vagrant should be able to at least hit some of those sweet spots. And let's talk about why. So, very briefly, you play as a young heroine named Vivian. She is known as a sellsword and a rune warden, meaning that she's very skilled with a blade and likes to go from town to town, performing different quests from residents that involve combat and magic, because she's also a rune warden and knows her way around magic. So, the premise of the story is that she is on a ship trying to find her father. She's going on this voyage, and one night she gets shipwrecked. Ends up in this one village, gets washed up to shore in the land of Mithrilia, and like any good RPG, she eventually starts to meet the residents, performs quests, but then gets caught up in this dark web of intrigue, dark secrets, and conspiracy and betrayal. So you can kind of see where things are going to go from here, like any good RPG, and it is a 2D hack and slash with Metroidvania elements, meaning you're going to have different maps that you're going to open up as you progress through the game, and you'll be able to fast travel and revert back to old areas once you unlock new skills and go into rooms and areas you weren't able to previously access. That's essentially the basic setup. Gameplay wise and combat, it's similar but different to Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, which we discussed before, whereas in Eiyuden Chronicle Rising, each of the 3 different playable characters were assigned a different button, and your combos were almost auto-played out based on just kind of jamming that one attack button, whereas sort of the Vagrant retains more of a classical style where you have a strong attack, a weak attack, a special, and charge attacks, and you'll combine all these different functions into these devastating combos that you'll unlock more abilities as you play through the game to add to your repertoire. And the combat itself really is the star of the show because it feels very satisfying. The hit detection, collision detection, and the overall impact feel exceptional. There's lots of loot to get, and it feels very satisfying, not only breaking down your enemies and collecting loot, but destroying the environment and just finding all the gold and mana crystals you can acquire. Now, in terms of that, I did mention mana crystals. Those are going to be your main currency to not only upgrade your equipment so that you can enhance it and then eventually enchant it with different rune magic for different elemental effects, but then on top of that, the crystals are the currency that are going to allow you to unlock new types of abilities and new buffs via a very impressive web of upgrades. There are a ton of different upgrades you can purchase for Vivian to really customize your experience and make the combat your own. So I found that very satisfying and offsets some of the problems I found with the game. So let's talk about some of the pros and cons of this game, because it definitely does a lot of things right, but being a young developer, I want to offer a few critiques because I see a lot of promise in what O.T.K is doing here, but there's definitely some things that need to be ironed out, maybe in some future updates or maybe a sequel or something to that effect. So let's talk about that. Firstly, let's talk about fast travel, because this is a Metroidvania-like game and fast travel is very important. My one gripe with this is that when you do go to these stelas, they're like little columns that come out of the ground that allow you to fast track to other areas and biomes in the game. When you're looking at the different area you want to fast travel to, it only shows you a graphic of the area, but not its relative placement on the map, which makes it a little bit confusing, and there's a lot of memorization that has to come into this effect, whereas typically in a Metroidvania, when you go to a fast travel, it will usually show you a point on the map you're traveling to. That is just a bit more intuitive, so I'd like to see that ironed out in future releases. Also, my biggest gripe with the game is when you're going to shopkeepers to buy new gear or new items to add to your inventory. Unfortunately, it doesn't show you how many inventory you already have of a particular item. So you have to jump out of the shop, check inventory, check to see how many types of potions you have, and then go back in and refill that. That should be a comparative feature right inside the shop. In addition to that, when you're buying new gear and new weapons, it also doesn't really compare it to what you have already, which I find in the modern age should just be a given. So that is something I would like to see maybe in future updates or in a potential sequel. The other gripe I have with this game is that with it placing such a reliance on its visual style, being inspired by Vanillaware, I would expect that there would have been a bit more effort placed into the background art, where the character design is fantastic. The main character of Vivian, the over 70 plus monsters, the over 10 plus bosses, they're all animated very well and designed very well. But then you'll notice sometimes in the background that some of the textures seem either incomplete or rushed, which is admittedly a bit immersion breaking. I'd like to see a bit more effort put into that. You can tell that this is a very small team, probably had limited funds, limited time to put this out, and maybe had ambitions above and beyond their capabilities. But I have to applaud them on trying to jam so much content into such a small package that can be admittedly beat in about 5 to 7 hours. So as I said before, they are a very small developer, very young, haven't done a lot of work yet, so I have to applaud them at least what they are trying to accomplish here. And if you're trying to scratch that itch and you haven't played Muramos in years and you're looking for something very similar, this is a good starting point. And price-wise, it's not too shabby. So if you do want to pre-order this via redartgames.com, it is set to release on June 2nd, 2023. The price is only 25 euros for the PS4 version, or 25 US, and a slightly costlier $30 Euro version for the Switch. But when it goes to buying games off of boutique sites, this is on the lower end of the price spectrum, so overall, not a huge investment. And I will say, flaws and all, I beat this game twice because there is a new game plus mode, plus there are multiple endings you can unlock, and there are different difficulty levels if you're finding it a little less challenging. But overall, I'd say this was way more challenging than Eiyuden Chronicle Rising. I found the scaling to be a lot better in terms of your leveling up progression. The enemies also leveled up in that regard, so there's definitely a lot of challenge here. And overall, the combat and the looting were so satisfying that I just kept coming back for more and wanted to beat the game multiple times, so I will salute it in that regard. So that is Sword of the Vagrant, now available for pre-order from redartgames.com, along with the now purchasable Eiyuden Chronicle Rising. Thank you for watching episode 43 of The Collecting Confidant with your host GunstarHero. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, Game Chasers, and peace.